In this operations management tutorial, we will look at productivity. Productivity is a measure of the effective use of resources. It is usually expressed as a ratio of output to inputs. Productivity ratios are used for planning workforce requirements, scheduling equipment, financial analysis, and a lot more. High productivity is linked to higher standards of living. It's easier to have higher productivity in manufacturing than it is in services. So, as an economy transitions from a manufacturing economy to a service economy, it's difficult to maintain high productivity. That means it's difficult to maintain a high standard of living. When a company has higher productivity relative to its competitors, it has a competitive advantage in the marketplace. They can either sell for the same price and make higher profits, or they can sell for a lower price at the same profit level and undercut their competition. When a domestic industry has high productivity, it is more difficult for a foreign company to enter that industry in the country. Let's look at some formulas. Partial measures of productivity, also known as single-factor productivity measures, are outputs divided by single input. For example, output divided by labor hours, output divided by labor dollars, output divided by overhead, output divided by material. When you have a single-factor measure of productivity, units are not an issue. In all formulas, the output can be measured in either dollars or units. With a single-factor productivity measure, the input can be measured either in dollars or labor hours or pounds of material or whatever makes sense. A multi-factor productivity measure is the output divided by two or more inputs. Note that with any measure of productivity, output is always in the numerator. When you have more than one measure in the denominator, you can only measure them in dollars because you couldn't add labor hours to pounds of material and make any sense. Total productivity is all inputs divided by all outputs. So in general, productivity is measured as outputs divided by one or more inputs. And you would use the inputs that would make sense for whatever you're trying to measure. You can also measure productivity growth or shrinkage. It's current productivity minus the previous productivity divided by the previous productivity times 100 to make it a percentage. For video examples on how to work these problems, my students can look at the video tutorials in the content menu of D2L. YouTube listeners can check out my Udemy MOOC at either one of the two URLs on the screen. I'll also put the URLs in the description. Service productivity is oftentimes much more difficult to measure than manufacturing productivity. This is especially true when it involves intellectual activity. It's also true when there's a high degree of variability in the service, and one or both of those describes many services. Think about a doctor's office. If output is measured in number of patients seen, then a doctor seeing easy cases would have higher productivity than a doctor seeing more difficult cases. If productivity was measured in terms of dollars output, then billing success or the type of customers you see, whether insurance or Medicaid, would affect your productivity. A useful measure related to productivity is process yield. It's fairly straightforward when products are involved. When no product is involved, when we're not talking about manufacturing, process yield measurement is often dependent on a particular process. For example, the percentage of cars available that are rented at a car rental place each day, or the percentage of students that come to a university based on the percentage of students accepted to the university. A lot of things affect productivity. Capital is the biggest one. Think about the job of digging ditches. One way to do it is with a bunch of big, strong, burly men and women out there with shovels digging manually. It'd have low capital cost, but low productivity. Now give one or two of those workers a ditch witch, and your productivity goes through the roof. But your capital expense goes through the roof as well. Quality improves productivity. What it does is increase the numerator. The higher your quality, the lower your rejects. The lower your rejects, the higher your output for the same level of inputs. Technology can increase your productivity as well. We've talked about that in prior lessons. It can increase your yield, it can increase your output, and it can increase your quality. Having good management that makes the right kinds of decisions can also increase your productivity. Productivity at another company doing a particular task is one of the drivers for outsourcing. A company can avoid the need to outsource by increasing productivity. Just as a reminder, as we've talked about before, outsourcing is not the same as offshoring. So how do you improve productivity? You can't improve it if you can't measure it, so the first step is to develop your productivity measures, the ones that are important to you and your company. Step 2 is to determine the critical operations. Those are the ones that are decreasing your productivity. These are sometimes called a bottleneck, although that term is not technically correct here. You want to develop methods for improving your productivity at those bottleneck operations. establish reasonable goals, get management support, which is one of the reasons why management is a productivity driver. Once you have improvements, you want to measure them and publicize those improvements to help motivate workers and, I guess, motivate management as well. And remember, productivity is not the same as efficiency. You can think about efficiency as doing more with less. You can think about productivity as doing what's needed with less. Shown on the screen is a graph of U.S. multi-factor productivity from 1950 to 2015, and as you can see, it has grown dramatically. Part of this is due to automation, part of this is due to offshoring low productivity operations, and I'm sure there's a lot of other drivers as well. If you enjoyed this video, please click like and consider subscribing to this channel.